Thank you, Marty. That's a powerful affirmation. The Spirit of Him who raised up Jesus dwells in me. Yeah, the Spirit of Him who raised up Jesus dwells in me. Let's say that together. The Spirit of Him who raised up Jesus dwells in me. What's the last part? And I am made perfect? And I am made perfect. Together. And I am made perfect. There's so much power in our words, so much power in our words. And just like singing out of the old hymns, if we take hold of that and let it vibrate inside of us, it transforms us, doesn't it? We've all had that experience. That's why we're here, because there's movement of consciousness. Thank you, Marty. Well, a man went to the doctor and asked him, "How can I live longer?" And so the doctor said, "Well, do you smoke?" And he said, "No." And he said, "Do you eat too much?" "No." "You eat junk food?" "No." "Do you go to bed late?" "No." "Do you run around with wild, promiscuous people?" "No." He said, "Then why would you want to live to be 100? There you go. It's like, so boring. There's kind of something to living, guarded all the time versus just living free, isn't there? Yeah. Well, I was reading this week in The Week That Changed the World by Ernest Wilson. And he doesn't write so much accurately scholastically about the scriptures, but he writes poetically. And so you get a real feel for this consciousness that is Jesus as we're moving through this Easter journey. And I wanted to share just a little insight that he wrote that just gives you a great picture of who this man Jesus was and is. He said, "There is no record that Jesus ever said to the sick who came to him that continued suffering would develop in them greater spiritual virtues. He didn't say to the leopard, 'Your disease is the result of wrong thinking, and I can't heal you because if I do, you'll continue in the same negative thinking.' He only said, in essence, 'Will you be made clean? Well then, be clean.' He did not say to anyone who came to him for deliverance from suffering, 'Yes, I will heal you, but that healing will not happen for several months just to test your faith.' Nor did he say to anyone, 'Well, it's true that I heal a lot of people, but oops, sorry, it's not God's will that you be healed.' He didn't let people go hungry, saying they should have planned ahead and brought food. When Peter lacked money to pay the tax collector, Jesus did not say, 'Peter, the gift of God is spiritual substance. Don't ask for money. God has nothing to do with money.' No, he instantly supplied what was needed. Jesus came to show us the universal Christ consciousness, which he called the Father. He taught mastery over every seeming negativity can be achieved by coming into living, vital connection with the Father, with that living, vital presence. Now, he goes on to say that some have argued that Jesus meant that everything was possible, but only in the afterlife. But he never said so. And the people who followed him weren't looking for something in the afterlife. They were hungry and wanted food now. They were poor and wanted jobs now. They wanted relief from suffering now. And he gave it to them. Without asking, without begging, he gave it to them. And he said, "The things I do, you can do also as you live in close, vital connection with the Father." And so that brings us this morning to our fourth doorway to God consciousness. If you've been with me over the past month, you know that we're in this Easter series, Doorways to God Consciousness. How do we walk through the doorway and open ourselves more fully to the consciousness of the Christ? And I've invited you to choose a spiritual attribute that you want to resurrect more fully in your life. Something positive, not something negative. And the 12 powers are great examples. You want to resurrect life, wisdom, faith, strength, order, whatever it is. For some people it's patience. For some people it's health and vitality. But whatever it is you want to work with in consciousness, we have the same spiritual quality we're journeying with for this whole series. And in the first week we said you want to begin to activate that redeeming, requalifying vibrational energy by saying, I intend to be life or love, whichever your spiritual quality is. You're all with me, right? We're working on this. Second week, he said once that redeeming, requalifying energy is stirred up in us, it causes an awakening. And that awakening then kind of releases a spiritual adrenaline that helps you power through any inertia. You know, when you think about making a change and you're excited about it for a week and then you kind of forget about it, or what was it I was working on, or what did Cherie say, or, you know, so I am awakening to love. I am awakening to life. Will stir that spiritual adrenaline that will keep you keeping on. Last week we looked at surrender. I am surrendering to love, or I surrender to love, or I surrender to life. Again, same spiritual quality that you're working on. And we looked at Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, surrendering his will, the lower consciousness to the higher consciousness of us, that we don't really lose anything. We're only surrendering the lesser ways to the higher ways. And the same thing in the crucifixion, which metaphysically meant the crossing out. The crucifixion is the crossing out of, Mr. Fillmore would say, error states of consciousness or error states of mind, ways of thinking that have become fixed states of mind or fixed beliefs. So we're crossing all of that out. And that brings us to our fourth doorway, which is assimilation. Now that you're down for the count, everything's wiped out, the error consciousness is gone, we're ready to assimilate life or assimilate this new attribute in consciousness. And assimilation takes place in the tomb. Assimilation takes place in the tomb. So I want to talk about that today, the metaphysics of that experience and how that moves consciousness toward this taking on this new attribute in our lives. Rocco Errico. How many of you know Rocco Errico? Not too many, really? We should have Rocco come and speak. That'd be a good one. He's in Atlanta, and he does metaphysical interpretation of the Bible, but he worked with Dr. Lamsa. How many of you know the Lamsa Bible? The Lamsa Bible, Dr. Lamsa lived in Syria in a village that was exactly like the village Jesus lived in that never went forward in time. So he spoke the native Aramaic language of Jesus. He somehow got out of that village, went to Oxford and was educated, Dr. Lamsa, came back and translated the scriptures with the influence of the native Aramaic language of Jesus. So he wrote the Lamsa Bible. And Rocco Errico studied with Dr. Lamsa, Dr. George Lamsa. So Dr. Lamsa has passed, and Rocco is kind of carrying on the work. And he has volumes of books that are all metaphysical interpretation. And so he's scholastic, he's really scholarly about his work. Anyway, he says in his book, Let There Be Light, the tomb is not an imprisonment, punishment, or a finality. And we know that from the resurrection story. He says metaphorically, not metaphysically, metaphorically, we've made the dark, the night, or the aloneness of solitude evil or disaster or ignorance, or represent loneliness or sorrow or distress. He says, but the darkness represents far more than negative ideas. It actually holds many hidden wonders. And then he goes on to say, in the darkness of the womb, human life is conceived and nurtured. In the darkness of the soil, seeds germinate. In the darkness of our minds, ideas are born. And he said, the darkness is a time of incubation, rest, and I love this line, secret rendezvous with invisible powers and unseen realities. So your time in the tomb is a time of rest, time of incubation, and a time of secret rendezvous with invisible powers and unseen realities. Because we can't see the mysticism of the Christ, we can only know it and feel it and intuit it. We don't generally go from the Garden in Gethsemane to crucifixion straight into resurrection, right? There's almost always a time of assimilation, and the 3 days in the tomb are symbolic of that deep transformational work the real work that's done in consciousness. And it's not done so much, it's not done by the human self of us, because the human self of us has been crossed out. And the 3 days is symbolic. It can be 3 days, 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 years. Some of us have been in a dark night of the soul, been in the darkness, and it's lasted longer than we've wanted it to, right? But when you get out on the other side and you look back, you can see everything that was being assimilated into you. It says it's a place in consciousness where we come out of the frenetic pace of life. We take the grave cloth off our heart, the binding off of our souls, and we unwrap who and what we've been so that who we are becoming can be assimilated into our being. You know, you come out of those experiences, don't you, and you say, I'm not the same person anymore, right? A lot of people I hear say, I lost myself in my marriage, and now I'm through that, and I'm not the same person anymore. I could never go back to that way of being again. I could never let myself get lost in all of that again. And there's that assimilation and coming forward. Sam Keen says to A Dancing God, his book, the silencing of the familiar and allowing of the new requires courage. In order for genuine newness to emerge and to take root, we must let go of what is known and familiar and undergo a decentralization of the ego, which can feel like death. That decentralization of the ego, that's that crossing out and letting go. He said the pain of giving up, the pain of death, is the pain of death, but death of the old is the birth of the new. And for us to develop a new idea, a new understanding, or a new consciousness means that we have to die to the old so that the new can be born and our former self can go, and the new self, the new consciousness can be implanted in us. I'm acquaintances with Bishop Carlton Pearson. Do any of you know his story? He's a wild guy. He's great. He was welcomed by All Souls Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is the largest universal Unitarian church in the world. They're known for their inclusivity in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they welcomed Carlton Pearson because he had been ostracized out of his regular church. He was an evangelical Pentecostal minister, and he had an experience where he was standing in his living room watching the news after the Rwandan crisis, and he saw all the refugees on television, thousands of them returning to their homeland after all the atrocities they had been through. And as he stood there and he watched that, he said, as an evangelical Pentecostal minister, he said, I've given my life to saving souls and helping people get to heaven and all of that. And so he found himself conversing with God as he watched all these refugees on TV, saying, he said, how did he say it? He says, how can you call yourself loving, God, after all these people have been through, you're going to suck all these unsaved people into hell? And he said, God responded, is that what you think I'm doing? And he said it was one of those epiphany moments for him. The voice, he said, this voice that he heard very clearly said, I'm taking them all into my presence. You're the one condemning them to hell. And he said that he got it. He just got it. In that moment, standing in his living room, everything changed in him. And he got the realization that there is only man-made hell. Now, we know that in unity. That doesn't seem like such a big revelation. But there's only man-made hell. And he said, had he known what that revelation would cause in his life, he said he might have kept it to himself. But he went out and he started preaching that the whole world is already saved. Muslims, Jews, Christians, gays, unchurched people, doesn't matter. Everyone is saved. And what happened was he lost everything. He lost everything. His congregation abandoned him. His evangelical congregation in Tulsa was average Sunday attendance of 6,000. He attended Oral Roberts University, and Oral Roberts had kind of taken him under his wing and called him a golden child, and even embraced him as a son. He was prayer partners with one of the presidents. He flew on private jets to the White House to do prayers with the President of the United States. He was powerful and he was influential, and now the whole world is saved. Are you kidding me? His congregation abandoned him with accusations of blasphemy. The country's whole evangelical community crucified him and had him formally declared a heretic, stripped him of all of his ministerial credentials, and left him with nothing. He said his congregation dwindled to a handful of people. He had no staff. He was deeply in debt. His wife divorced him and took the children because she couldn't be left with this man who'd gone off the cliff. And his lifelong evangelical community had moved on as if he were dead. Had nothing. He's a really powerful speaker, too. He's got that deep voice. He's a great speaker. So he said, but always there is resurrecting life. Always there is resurrecting life. How many of you have been through a professional crucifixion in your workplace? It's not fun, you know. Well, he said, always there is resurrecting life, and he shares that in his own tomb experience, that he had to go inward to comfort himself. He had to honor his own questions. He had to treat himself with respect because where he had condemned so many others, he was now being condemned by people. He had to reconcile deeply held lifelong beliefs, and it took him several years. I always love it. When a minister is ousted from their traditional faith, you know where they go? Unity. Unity World Headquarters. That's where he went. He went to Unity World Headquarters, and is there a place for me, he said. And he went up to Chicago because Johnny Coleman, how many of you know that Johnny Coleman has big work in Chicago? She was retiring, and so they hired Carlton to be her successor. But he was there for about 18 months, but he wasn't exactly in sync with them. But he loves unity, and he's a big part of all of the New Thought movement now, preaching universal oneness and inclusiveness. But I always love it that he ended up going back to Tulsa to the Unitarian Universalist Church, and that's where he built, again, they welcomed him back to Tulsa in this new way. And so he had come full circle. He said, always there is resurrection. He began a ministry of love and inclusion, leading a movement to share his inclusive God in Pentecostal churches. He says, I am Bishop Carlton Pearson with nothing. My ministry, my money, my marriage, my mind, all of my beliefs were gone. But there is resurrecting power. I was able to have new life. I was able to begin again. In the tomb of my experience, I was able to see how I fit with both the fundamentalists and the Unitarian Universalists, and now I bridge the two consciousnesses. I have found my destiny. Interestingly, Hollywood is making a movie about him. So it's in film productions now, I saw on his Facebook. So it should be out. Probably, I don't know how long that takes, but maybe next year, springtime next year. Maybe they'll do it at resurrection time next year. That would be really good. We'll all go together, or we'll show it here. The resurrecting power is assimilated in us in our tomb experiences when we are closed away and we have a living, vital connection with what Jesus called the Father. It is in those experiences that the transformation takes place and we are changed at depth. Jesus told us in advance, after 3 days I will rise again. He let us know that there is a process, and I think most of us can look back on the major overcomings of our life, and we can see that there's like 3 phases: a time of preparation, that time of waiting and development, and then the time of fulfillment. But the hardest part is the second phase, the time of waiting. And that's where we are in our Easter series here, in the tomb, down for the count, stripped of everything, ego decentralized. You can't even think for yourself. Spirit is infusing your mind with divine mind, and you're becoming one with the Father in that connection, closed away in that tomb. And that requires surrender, as we did last week, and an allowing of assimilation. It's this time when the ego has been decentralized, that the last barrier between the personal and the spiritual is completely dissolved. We come out of that frenetic place and we stand vulnerable. We're just there. There's no identity any longer other than, and we're just in this space of purity and waiting and light. Well, it's dark, but there's movement of consciousness. You don't have to fear the tomb experience, because in the tomb we're promised that we're sheltered in times of trouble. While in the process of deep transformation in those experiences, you already feel like you're down for the count, right? It's like, what's that little poster that says, I've got one nerve left and you're standing on it? You know, it says a little thing. You're right there and you think, I'm protected, but we get the assurance that in the deep transformations we are promised immunity from the snare of the fowler and deadly pestilence. We are promised safety from the terror by night and the arrow that flies by day. The psalmist reminds us, for he will hide me in his shelter in the day of trouble, and he will conceal me under the cover of his tent. Isn't that beautiful? You're hidden away with spirit, you're covered over, you're sheltered, and you're safe. There is a protecting, providing love where all of the strain and the anxiety is removed, and you let go even of striving for spiritual things. You're striving for nothing. You are resting in God in that time of incubation, in that time of stillness, and you're gathering strength. But you're not even doing it consciously. Do you remember when you come through those dark nights of the soul and you look back and you think, all I was doing was whining and complaining. I didn't think I was gathering strength. But when we know this process, we can be more conscious of it, more deliberate about it, that wow, something's happening in my life. I'm transforming and changing into something that I've never been before. I don't have to be afraid. I know that I'm in the shelter of God, and I know that I'm gathering strength for what is to come. I can't see it. I can't sense it, I can't feel it, all my senses have been shut down, my ego can't analyze it, I'm just there. Gathering strength for the power of the still greater demonstration that is going to follow. The resurrection next week is coming. In the tomb, what happens is that the clear, unclouded mind of the Christ dominates our thinking. It thinks through us, thinks as us. The resurrection energy that's taking place in the tomb interpenetrates everything about us. Our physical bodies, our thoughts, our spirit, everything about us. And it converts one element into another, many elements into another. It can convert trillions of cells from illness into life. It can convert years of resentment into peace and well-being. It can convert hatred into compassion. It can even convert Carlton's bigotry and hatred and absorb it into universal love. This unclouded mind of Christ, clear mind of Christ, the purity of Christ, begins to move in and through us if we let it. Well, we can't. It's not even that we let it. It's just happening because we're in this place where sense has been shut down, mind, human ego is decentralized, and divine mind moves in us to convert whatever needs to be lifted up so that resurrection can take place. In the tomb, this great and mighty work is kept up until your whole consciousness is vitalized. And it's then that you gather the energy and the strength and the vibration to make your overcoming. So you're not the one doing it, you're participating in it, but it's a dominance of spirit that's moving in you. The affirmation I like in those moments is, the Lord is perfecting that which concerns me. When you're in a crucifixion experience, you're in a dark night of the soul, you don't know what's happening in your life, let's put our hands on our hearts this morning and say, the Lord is perfecting that which concerns me. Together, The Lord is perfecting that which concerns me. Right. The perfection, the resurrection energy is moving in and through. Divine mind is swirling in and through you, converting in you those lesser things and lifting them up, resurrecting them into new life. After the pain, the suffering, the work that we've done in our minds and our hearts and collapsed into this closed away place with spirit, we come out of the tomb experience, and we will, and you will, saying, I'm not the same person. I could never be that way again. I am a new creation in Christ. And you feel it. You feel it in yourself. And you can go on with your life happily. Happily, if you let yourself, if you don't, drag back. I always love it that after Jesus was resurrected and Mary was in the garden and saw him, she didn't recognize him, remember? She perceived him to be the gardener, but then he spoke and she recognized his voice pattern and she said, Rabbi, and she grabbed for him. And he said, touch me not, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. And Mary represents those emotions from the past life that would cling to us, that would try to keep things the way they were, keep things the same. And he's still in the process of making that ascension, and he can't let himself be attached emotionally or physically to anything in the past, in the previous life, in the previous way of being. Touch me not, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. No external conditions or circumstances can hold us when we make mental contact with the Christ. You pass over from the human consciousness into the Christ consciousness, and you move into atonement, at one-ment. In the assimilation, our affirmation is, I am one with love, life, whatever your quality is this week. It's I am one with whatever. Charles Fillmore said it this way, you'll crack the omnipresent ethers when you're working with assimilation. Throughout our life, we die and resurrect many times, don't we? Some of our resurrections are bigger than others. Some of our crucifixions are mini ones, and then some of them are really the bigger ones. After enough life, though, doesn't it become clear that the farther we travel and journey on life, that things really do work out? They work out. They work out. And we get that knowing in us. Some of that comes with the wisdom of age, but we get that knowing. You can know it now. Take on that knowing now that things really do work out, that we survive, that we get through it, whatever it is, that life goes on. We get the new job, the divorce settles, the kids grow up, you get off drugs, you're in recovery. It works out. It works out. After enough life, it becomes clear that the farther we travel on the journey of life, the more births we'll experience, the more newness we experience, the more adventures, thus the more deaths. Because after enough life, we get the cycle that it's life, death, resurrection. Life, death, resurrection. And we begin to understand that this is the process for how we advance our souls, how we advance our consciousness. Life, death, resurrection. And when we understand that, then we can step into it more willingly, more consciously. And the results of that then is it can go by a little more a little more quickly, a little more swiftly, and a little more gently. When you know you're in this, I'm in the tomb experience. I'll see you in 3 days, See you in 3 days. You won't recognize me. I won't be the same person when I get through this, whatever it is. So this week, as we continue to affirm our doorways to God consciousness, I intend to be, I am awakening to, I surrender whatever, and I am one with whatever you're working on. If you find yourself in a tomb experience in your life right now, I invite you to recognize that this intention that you have set, this new you that's coming forth, is being assimilated, is being resurrected, is gathering the strength that it needs to burst forth and be this new way of being that you're going to be. Assimilation is, your intention is being assimilated into your being, and a new order of things is being inaugurated or resurrected. So keep going. Right now, there is a resurrection work going on in every one of us. Right now, we are all rising into higher consciousness, moving from the human self of us to the Christed self of us. Right now our faith is being strengthened. Right now our new life is forming. So we want to stay with it and keep at it. Let's affirm one more time together. The Lord is perfecting that which concerns me. Together, the Lord is perfecting that which concerns me. I am resurrected into new life. Together, I am resurrected into new life. And so it is. Amen. God bless you.
Thank you.